Hello and welcome to the Three View Mirror Podcast, your weekly dose of at least three things, 70s, 80s, and 90s, where every single week one of us takes over the hosting job and comes up with three topics that we will discuss over the next hour. Now, the cool thing about this is the topics that they come up with, which this week is Chelle, those topics are known only to Rochelle this week. Chris and I have absolutely no idea what she's going to come up with, which pretty much runs its course throughout this entire podcast. That said, it's up to you and us to try to figure out what hidden connection Rochelle has planted in the three topics that she's chosen. So I'm John Catridis, better known as Gen X Jono, across my social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Chris
Clues, better known as Chris Clues. I'm a keynote speaker and author. I have a book series on the work and life lessons that we can learn from 80s pop culture, and I speak on that topic as well, the greatest decade for pop culture in history.
And I'm Rochelle O'Black, better known as Gen X Chelle, across all my social media channels, where I focus on making fun of and celebrating Gen X at the same time.
This is the Three View Mirror Podcast.
Gentlemen, are you ready for my topic today? Because you're going to absolutely love the three topics that I have for you.
I don't think we're ever ready for your topic, Chelle, but I am throwing out a challenge today. Okay. I am willing to bet hard-earned cash, $10 of money that I struggle for, especially after the Christmas holidays. I'm willing to bet $10 Chris doesn't get this topic connection this week.
I'll be on that one.
You should take that. I still haven't gotten one. And what episode are we on now? And I haven't even come close. So,
yeah. It's a good bet.
I'm willing to bet you, Chris, that I'll get it and you won't. What do you think? You up for a challenge?
Ooh.
I mean, I always like competition and betting. So, who knows? Maybe I've been holding back. Maybe I've just been bluffing, waiting for this moment. So sure, let's do it.
All right, let's give it a shot.
Chris, this might be your day. It could be, because here are my three topics: Three's Company, Saved by the Bell, and the Brady Bunch.
Oh, I own this.
You own this. Okay,
I own this.
You own all the topics, each one separate, or you own the connection?
I think, so far just the three topics separately, but I am embarrassed by how much I know about Saved by the Bell.
John, I agree with you. I was older and still watching it. I absolutely loved that show. I saw every episode, and I have no idea why. Like, I would have been 20. I don't even know. 21, 22. I don't even know what I was.
Yeah, that's the one of the three that, I obviously saw it, but didn't pay as close attention, I think.
Let's start with Three's Company. And I know everybody has something to say about Three's Company. It was a favorite of mine. Was it a favorite of the two of you?
For me, yes, absolutely. It was really, I remember it being one of the first sitcoms that I enjoyed and watched, that I wasn't forced to watch by my dad because, at dinner he's like, okay, we're going to watch Andy Griffith. We're going to watch MASH. I chose to watch Three's Company for a number of reasons. But yeah, the humor was one, and I loved it.
I was a huge Three's Company fan. I think my favorite episode is the one where a couple of them are in the kitchen and someone's listening from the living room and they misconstrue the conversation that's going on.
Like here?
Like, that was every episode. That happened every episode. That show created a script around only one thing, and that's mishearing something and think sex was going on in the other room.
And the slapstick humor. The slapstick humor, I think, was one of my favorite parts of that. It's the first time I can remember. There were some other shows that have done that in the past, but it was the first time, I think, where the slapstick humor was the humor of the show. That and the sexual innuendos, of course.
Yeah, so I'm a huge John Ritter fan, and that was obviously my first exposure to John Ritter, somebody we lost, like so many of the comedians and people that entertained us, lost way too young. But that was my first experience with him, and I would just say to people, if you've ever heard of the movie Skin Deep, it was kind of went under the radar a little bit, but it has John Ritter, and it has I won't go into it, but it's one of my favorite scenes of all times in movies. I'll just say it involves things that are glow in the dark, and that's all I'm going to say. But John Ritter, fantastic, and of course for me as a kid, Suzanne Summers, a lot of the reason that I watched it.
Did you ever feel bad for Joyce DeWitt, because she was a beautiful woman too, but everybody sort of seemed to focus on the Suzanne Summers as the sex pot of the show?
So I mean, I absolutely see that, but that seemed to be like a thing back then, right? First of all, there was always the blonde and the brunette. They always had this juxtaposition, whether it was Too Close for Comfort with the daughters, whether it was the Jacqueline Smith and the Farrah Fawcett. They always had that juxtaposition, it seemed. They always had the sex pot and the bookish one. They just liked having that offset. But I think Joyce DeWitt was definitely beautiful, and I think, it was played off that way as well, that it was Jack with these two beautiful women. But I just love, like, the trivia that I think we might have touched on previous episodes. Things like the opening sequences of Three's Company had, like, some hidden things in there. There was the woman walking down that Jack sees and falls off his bicycle with the big curly black hair. That's Suzanne Summers. That's her in a black wig when they film it. Later on, when they have the scene change, and it's Joyce DeWitt and Jack and all of them are at a zoo, there's Joyce DeWitt bending down and a little boy comes up to her and she like has a little moment with him. That's actually John Ritter's son.
Jason
in that
Ritter,
scene.
yes.
Jason Ritter is actually in that part of it. And then finally, the other piece of trivia I know is I think Joyce DeWitt was under contract with Legs Pantyhose that she had to be seen in pantyhose. She put it into her contract with Three's Company that she would always be wearing pantyhose in every scene. So as you watch the show, she could be in bed in pajamas and she still has pantyhose on. She wears shorts, she still has pantyhose on. She's working. Doesn't matter what scene, what she's doing, what she's wearing, she always has pantyhose on.
I did not know that. And now I have to go back and I'm going to have to look up an episode so I could go back and see that thing in there. I did not know that.
And we've talked about the sitcom songs as well. We've talked about how the movie soundtracks in the 80s, but also like the songs in the sitcoms in the 70s and 80s, and how catchy they were and how they really took some time, invested some time clearly in those theme songs. And many of them hit the top 40. I don't know if Come and Knock on My Door actually hit the top 40, but it's one that we all remember. They did a great job with that. It was an important part of the show.
And it's funny, I could walk into a room and not know why I'm in there, but I could sing like the entire Three's Company introductory song. It's amazing.
And that's actually the second iteration of the theme song they came up with, because the original Three's Company pilot still had Jack, still had two women. They were different actresses. There was no Suzanne Summers. It was at a different location. It was at a different song. The Ropers were still in it. But they took them a while to get the pilot to get picked up. They tried it a number of different ways. And the original was based a little bit more, what was it, Man About the House? Three's Company was actually a takeoff of a show from Great Britain that they took the concept from. And the first pilot was more closely tied to it. But it didn't do well. It never got picked up.
Man in the House was definitely, I had that written down. Man in the House was a retooling of a British show because they thought that they could Americanize something that, came across the pond. And Man in the House was it. You read my mind. Gentlemen, I have a question then. Are you the Ropers or Mr. Furley?
Wow. I feel like Mr. Roper was everybody's warning about HOAs. If you've ever been in a homeowners association, it was a warning way ahead of time what was going to happen if you lived in a condo and you had an HOA. But that's a good question. John, what do you think? I got to think about this a little bit more.
It's so close. And when you talk about physical slapstick, physical comedy, Don Knotts had it. His face yoga, the things he was able to do to stretch his face for a scene to make it funny, his scarves. I mean, I would say hands down Don Knotts, except for the mugging that Norman Fell was able to do after a joke, just stare through that fourth wall and look out at you, that takes it over the top for him, I think.
Yeah.
That moment just does it for me.
When Norman Fell was also the one that, as soon as there was any sort of sexual innuendo, when he was looking out at you like that, those eyebrows went up and you just knew what he was thinking based purely on his facial expression, which I thought was amazing.
And you both know how old Norman Fell was at the beginning of Three's Company, correct?
You're going to do this to us again.
He was 54.
No.
I'm going to be 54 in 2 months. I am fucking Mr. Roper. Not literally, but I'm him. I'm Mr. Roper's age. I'm not okay with this. And I think Don Knotts was like a year older.
Don Knotts was older only by a year?
Only by like a year when he started. Yeah. I'm telling you, who
wow.
would have thought unfiltered cigarettes and bourbon for breakfast would have such a detrimental effect on people's well-being?
On how you look.
Yeah. I'd have to go. I now think about it, I'd have to go Mr. Furley only because Don Knotts as Barney Fife, and then in The Ghost of Mr. Chicken. And I grew up, again, I'd mentioned my dad with watching Andy Griffith earlier. It would probably be Don Knotts for me because I already knew him as an actor. And he was, by the way, I mean, as Barney Fife, he looked like he was 60. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Apple Dumpling Gang?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Right, yeah.
I loved the Apple Dumpling Gang as a kid. Here's one in that same vein. If you can't take Suzanne Summers, okay, take Chrissy out of it. Everyone that followed her, whether it was Cindy Snow or Terry the nurse, any favorites of the Suzanne Summer replacements?
Oh. What was the second one you said? No,
Terry was the nurse. Terry the nurse felt like there were two Janets. That never worked for me. Cindy was still goofy and it worked, and she still did the Jiggle TV that the Three's Company was known for. I mean, it invented the term Jiggle TV. But Terry coming in as a nurse was just another Ed McMahon, another straight man, another, foil and it lost something. At that point, that was the beginning of the end for me as a kid. It didn't have the same feeling.
Whereas the Ropers and Mr. Furley, whenever there was an exchange there, that was, I think everybody accepted it. And I think they were a little fearful of whether anybody would accept a new building manager coming in, but he was very successful. But Suzanne Summers, from what I understood too, she had a lifelong feud with Joyce DeWitt throughout,
They all, even John Ritter, they all came to terms before John Ritter passed, before Suzanne Summers passed. So they all did kind of make up as time went on, which was kind of great. We just lost Suzanne Summers this year.
Yeah.
And she battled breast cancer for decades. I mean, just an amazingly courageous battle on her terms. Say what you want about the choices she made them for herself. And, we lost John Ritter. We lost Suzanne Summers. Now Joyce DeWitt is remaining. The Ropers are both gone, I think. Don Knotts obviously is gone. It's just, it's a moment in time that's gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say, I don't think that anybody could replace Suzanne Summers. She just, it's really hard. And we've talked about this in episodes in the past. I was fortunate to grow up with a dad at a small production company. And I remember him always telling me, and my friends that are in production now, the hardest thing to do is comedy. People think it's drama. It's not. The hardest thing to do as an actor, actress is comedy. That comedic timing is just, it's so difficult. And she was so good at it. And so I think that challenge, I don't know that you could replace her. It wasn't like, when Woody Harrelson replaced Coach, it really just, it worked. Don Knotts replacing the Ropers worked. Maybe it's because they already had a little bit of a resume. People maybe knew them a little bit. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but it's difficult to replace somebody who is such a great comedian like Suzanne Summers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think Jenny Lee Harris, if I'm getting her name right, I'm pretty sure that's right, who was Cindy Snow, who came in, I think, as Chrissy's cousin or a relative, played the same vein, was in the same mold, and that kind of worked. But then, like I said, afterwards with Terry, they decided to go in a completely different direction. But to your point, nobody in our memories, Joyce DeWitt was Janet.
Mm-hmm.
Typecast, really hard to come out of it. Suzanne Summers kind of came out of it, but made her, I think, literally billions outside of Hollywood with her Thigh Master and with her fitness and with her clothing lines and makeup lines. And, you know, even John Ritter found it difficult to find success directly after Three's Company, even when playing the same part, because Three's a Crowd flopped horribly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was so good. He was so good in Sling Blade, though. I mean, that was when he really broke out, I think. Away
he
from
passed away while he was filming his latest sitcom, which was I can't think of the name of it at the moment. Chris, if you could help me out, the one where
101 rules about dating my daughter. 7 rules.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's and that was a good show, if you ask me. I think it failed only because he was gone.
He was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was enough time between the two that made that possible, I think. Suzanne Summers found success on the small screen again with Step by Step with Patrick Duffy. But there was enough time that had passed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was unfortunate. And then, of course, you know, you talk about what happens after something like that happens. And his daughter in 7 Rules, I think 7 Simple Rules or 7 Rules for Dating My Daughter, was, oh God, why her name is slipping my mind, the actress, but on The Big Bang Theory.
Yep.
So, you know, here she was on this with her big break as a young actress, and she's a great comedic actress as well. And then suddenly it's over, and then The Big Bang Theory comes along. So it's pretty awesome for her.
So, okay, number 2.
Moving on to number 2, John's second guilty pleasure, besides When Beneath My Wings, would probably now be named Saved by the Bell. So, John, you want to sing us the song here at the beginning? What do you want to do? Would you like to, you know?
I don't sing, but I could. You know, you mentioned how old we were when it came on, and we were fairly young when it was. The series was originally named something about Mrs. Bliss. Good Morning, Mrs. Bliss, because it was really about Zach and his teacher first. I told you I know these topics. You know,
It was a Disney Channel show.
Yep.
Where they retooled it. They kind of said, okay, this could do better if we put it in a better spot and in a better position, kind of like Three's Company and the way that the show was based on the British show.
So they took it, and it was one of the first live-action Saturday morning shows. So it originally, as you said, was a Disney show, Good Morning, Miss Bliss, and then they transitioned it. And I think it went over to NBC, and they put it into the Saturday morning cartoon time slots. But it was like a way of transitioning kids as they aged out of the Saturday morning cartoons, if that could ever be a thing, and put them into an actual sitcom situation. And it did phenomenally well. And it was a guilty pleasure. It was laughable. There's so many episodes that have reached pop culture, you know, that even as a 23, 24-year-old just coming out of college, you know, you'd watch it and it was just sitting there and you'd laugh at it and you watched it, how do they say, ironically. I wasn't vested in the characters, but it was fun.
You wanted to know what was going on with Kelly Kapowski and Zach Morris. You know, you wanted to know, like, what were they going to be together? How were they doing? You know, it was always that, and it kind of mirrored everything that we had. Maybe, I know for me, I had just maybe gotten out of high school, and it mirrored for me all the things that I had remembered. So it was like a nice memory to see that you know, the principal, you know, Mr. Belding and everybody, and there was the jock, and then there was the cool kid, and there was the pretty one and the smart one, and so it was really like a microcosm of everything that we had in school when we were kids.
Yeah, and for me, I just say Kelly Kapowski. I mean, that was the only reason I watched. Honestly, Tiffany Amber Thiessen, that was it. I enjoyed the show for what it was. As John said, it was just you didn't get deeply invested in the characters, but part of that was because they only had, as far as I can recall, there were only a few episodes where they tackled maybe, you know, serious topics, and they did on a few occasions, but it was very light, and it was designed that way. Yeah,
they tackled caffeine pills. They tackled some serious topics. What's her face was very. What was it? I'm so excited. I'm so excited. That is still
Elizabeth
one of my
Berkley, yes.
Elizabeth Berkley of what was it, striptease fame. She went on and changed her image. Showgirls, that's what it was. Yeah. Look, you jumped in on that pretty quick, Chris.
Well, I mean, because I know honestly, honestly have never seen it. I just know that it was not a good choice for her.
It was a horrible movie.
It was, but it was so bad it was good. It was very heavily watched by people. Gee, I don't know why. But it was just so bad it was good. And her acting, it was like she was, I forget what her name was in Saved by the Bell. It's slipping me at the moment. But it was like her only 2 years later. Now she's a stripper. That's how it felt. She didn't do that character all that well.
Well, and the characters did. So we talked about Three's Company being like a moment in time. Saved by the Bell was a moment in time because they actually took the same characters and then tried to push it off into prime time because things like Blossom were doing well, and there were a lot of shows about young people that had now bridged over to prime time, and it was the college years, and the sequel did not do well at all. Even though it was the same characters, they brought back Lark Voorhees, they brought back Tiffany Amber Thiessen. They brought back Mario Lopez. You see, I even know the names of the actual actors. I own this. I don't know if that's helping my cause.
They've had reboots too. They did a reboot where Mark Paul Gosselaar, the Zach Morris, was now an older, he was, I don't know if he was principal, but he was something related to the kids, and it actually went on to be a hit series in those later years, whatever those were. But I think he was like 40 or whatever.
Yeah, a bunch of them came back, and I think they all qualify as Gen Xers. They're the younger end of our Gen Xers, and they've all had good careers. Mario Lopez continues to be on television today. Mark Paul Gosselaar has done other series. He did Capital. He's done a number of different series that went on for a while, and he's done some movies, and they all had careers that spanned from Saved by the Bell. So as goofy as a little kid show as it was, it launched these guys into lifelong careers.
Mark Paul Gosselaar plays a good cop. I can't remember the cop show, but he was also a cop on a show, and then he was also a vampire. There was a book series by Justin Cronin, and I read the series, and it was a vampire kind of a movie show, and he ended up being the star of that. It got canceled very quickly, which I was very, not happy about, but he did an amazing job, and he was no longer Zach Morris. And I think that's a hard thing for kids to jump out of, in jumping out of those roles and heading into something very new. They get typecast as the, wacky school cool guy, Zach Morris, but he jumped out of that well.
NYPD Blue helped him a lot, like making the jump to that show later on in life. That was the first cop show that he was on. Then he did another one somewhat recently, like a cop buddy show not too long ago. But yeah, breaking the mold seems to be the only, and I think that's what Elizabeth Berkley was trying to do with Showgirls. She wanted to break the mold. Justin Diamond, who passed away a few years ago, I mean, he broke the mold in a completely, well, I guess not completely different than Showgirls, but he went into the porn industry.
Yeah. Jamie, I think her name is Foxworth from Family Matters, the younger sister in Family Matters, who was just basically written out of the show. She also went into the porn industry, which I thought was kind of another one of those hidden connections about, well, this one's about porn, but still.
The porn
Go
scare.
Figure.
The porn scare of Elizabeth Berkley. Elizabeth Berkley, what's interesting is, John, I never thought about it that way in terms of her. I mean, obviously she was trying to break out of that typecast role, but maybe if she would have waited a few more years before doing Showgirls, maybe there was like a step in between that would have like allowed her to shed that Saved by the Bell persona and then move towards something like Showgirls, if that's what she, was choosing to do. Because there have been other examples of people who have gone way away from the character they had, but typically there's some steps in between. And, maybe that's part of the reason that it just didn't work for her versus some of the other ones. And it's unfortunate with Dustin Diamond too, because I think of all of them, to me, he was the most talented. He
really?
Just kind of, I felt like it. Yeah, he was. I thought he was like, I mean, they were all good in their own way, but I felt like he was the most talented of the group.
To pull off that goofy role. Like you said, you think comedy is harder than anything, so it was easy for
Yeah.
Zach maybe to pull off the cool kid role, but then pulling off that goofball role a little bit harder. But yet,
And-
if Tiffany Thiessen would have went on to play in Striptease, I feel like she would have been able to. I think everybody would have watched it then, and
I would have
That would have
watched it.
worked.
I would have
That would
watched
have
it.
worked. I'm seeing Oscar caliber performance. That would have worked.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned and also Dustin Diamond, like I saw a documentary on him, and he was talking about how it was, of all the kids were all, quote unquote pretty, and then he had to play that different role, that where he was kind of like the geeky kid but also very funny. And so I don't know, maybe there's something to that as well. And I also think when you mentioned the sequel to it and why it didn't work, there was a lot of competition at that point. If I'm getting my years right, you had Melrose Place or 90210, maybe you had the Class of '96. You had all of these shows that were out there that were happening. They were talking about the same thing.
it was like they were targeting the growing Gen Xers, because the cartoon networks or the Saturday morning cartoons, as to John's point, were ending. And so then we had to move into the teen dramas, and then we had to move into the young adult dramas. And that perhaps is a nice bridge as to why Friends then, it was like they were following us, and we were growing up with all these people from cartoons through to the teen years, and then even on through Friends.
Yeah.
Now with the Golden Girls.
Yeah, I guess.
Who are
Well, and
also
even the
48
same
years
people.
old.
I mean, they continue to grow up with us. Mario Lopez just turned 50. He's 3 years younger than Mr. Roper, to bring us back to the first topic. And he has a young child. I think he's like a 5 or a 6-year-old, and he admits, that he got started later in life with having kids and whatnot. But it shows, it just shows again the difference that we constantly highlight about choosing our age to a certain degree. We can be Mr. Roper. You can be, if you want to be Mrs. Roper in a Moo or F Can or whatever the hell those things are called, have at it. But you can choose to instead be Halle Berry. So the other thing you mentioned, Chris, you mentioned how they're all pretty people, except for like Dustin Diamond, who played the geeky kid. But there was a second geek that was brought in, a geekette, on Saved by the Bell, which introduced a lot of young Gen Xers and younger millennials to the concept of nepotism. Any clue? Do you guys remember?
Oh, no. You have to tell me.
So this was an Aaron Spelling production.
Yeah.
So Tori Spelling. Aaron Spelling had this thing of putting his kids constantly in his shows. And Tori Spelling, as a young girl, was not the Kelly Kapowski, to put it delicately. She wasn't that prototypical, really pretty girl. And yet he just kept shoehorning her into his productions until it finally until it took. And I just remember being like, how many times is he going to put his kids into his things and nobody talk about it? Because it happened again on 90210. They were both his kids were in the Love Boat a number of times. He got paychecks by shoving his kids into his shows. And then he kept the money, because I think he cut both of them out at the end.
Well, I mean, never mind. Go on.
Let me clear my throat.
I thought your connection was bad.
No, I stumbled.
The connection was bad.
But that's a good point with, Aaron Spelling, right? Aaron Spelling and, Tori in 90210. Or no. Was it 90210 or Melrose Place? 90210.
It was 90210. Both.
Both, yeah. And she ended up being a pretty good actress, but you're right. It was, he was shoehorning her in, and it was so obvious when you look at the rest of the cast, whether you agree with that or not, it's just the reality of who those casts were on Saved by the Bell, 90210, and Melrose Place. A lot of pretty people.
And there were more characters that came in that we got to see later on in life. Leah Remini played a recurring role in Saved by the Bell as one of Zach's girlfriends.
I love her.
As soon as you mention it, then I start thinking back to specific episodes, but I couldn't pull up in my brain, all the guest stars that were on any of these shows, because they all had tons of guest stars on them.
Well, and less guest stars than debuts. Like Leah Remini wasn't a star guest starring. She was nobody. But it was her first, place that we'd met her. And I think that's really cool looking back. So, I mean, even goofy little shows like Saved by the Bell launched huge careers. Is that the connection? If it is, I said it first.
We still have to talk about the Brady Bunch yet.
I want my $2. Oh, that's it. Should be a $2 bet, Chris.
It should be a $2 bet. Yes.
We haven't even talked about it. We haven't even talked about it yet. So we have to talk about the Brady Bunch.
Well, let's go to the Brady Bunch. Unless you got something else on Saved by the Bell, Chris?
No, I just say if it's a $2 bet, you better have a switchblade comb. $2 cash.
So that just takes us right on.
So,
speaking.
Time out.
Okay.
How impressed are you by how much I knew about Saved by the Bell?
This is not a timeout, John. This needs to show up as a short. You're not allowed to short yourself out of saying, I'm a huge fan of Saved by the Bell.
That's right.
As I'm talking about this, like Lark Voorhees, I'm like, how did that name come into my brain? I can't remember what my wife told me to do this morning.
But for that show, for whatever reason, it stuck with, and it had less episodes than I was trying to compare the number of episodes. No,
they had a lot of episodes. The characters
it was a lot, but it was
television.
It was less episodes than the Brady Bunch or Three's Company, and yet it just imprinted onto our minds. I remembered every one of the actors' names as well for whatever reason.
Somebody in one of the comments on our Facebook page outed me as a closet pothead. And I don't know what vibe I'm throwing out there that is putting that out there. But although they're wrong today, I will say that on more than one occasion, that was the state of mind I was in when watching Saved by the Bell.
Well, then how could you not be a Beavis and Butthead fan? I mean, that just goes with it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't even make any sense. No, going back to the schools though, I was going to mention that what's interesting is Saved by the Bell. If you think about all the sitcoms that were based in a school setting, and there were some really good ones and some not so good ones. But if you ask people, like, what is the sitcom or show that you remember being set in a school, and to Chelle's point, at not having a lot of, as many episodes typically as a sitcom does, a lot of people are going to say Saved by the Bell first. When you had Welcome Back, Kotter, you had Head of the Class, which actually was pretty good, did not run for very long, but was pretty good. But I think if you go back and you think about all those ones set in schools, I would bet Saved by the Bell would probably be, if you took a survey, it would probably be the one that people would come up with the most.
John, you're not allowed to answer this question. I'll have to, because we know already that you just know all of your Saved by the Bell trivia. Okay. So we'll ask, but Chris, do you remember the name of the high school? Because we already know John knows.
I'm just going to throw out Shermer High School. And I know that's wrong, but that's the one that I know. Shermer High School, right there. The Breakfast Club.
I don't remember.
What?
I will if you give me a clue. It's. I know it. I almost had it. Oh, I can't remember.
Starts with a B.
Bell.
Bay something.
Bayside.
Bayside. Yep.
I got it.
Chris beat it. Chris beat it.
Do you remember the restaurant that they all hung out at?
$2.
The Max.
No, I didn't remember that one.
Yep, the Max.
Nope.
Okay.
So, gentlemen, that just takes us, let's head on over. We've talked about Three's Company. We've talked about Saved by the Bell and all the ways that we love both of those shows. I think they were classics for our generation and others. So let's move on to the Brady Bunch. And, the Brady Bunch clipped over from being classic to being famous to being very well known to a pop culture icon is the Brady Bunch. I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't know who the Brady Bunch is for generations that wouldn't know them.
You mentioned iconic theme songs. We could all sing the Three's Company without a doubt. I can you know, I can do the Saved by the Bell song. We had bus rides, field trips in school where we sang the Flintstones and the Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island. I mean, those songs, if not Billboard top hits, were parts of the soundtracks of our lives. And a lot of the Brady Bunch was filmed before we ever were old enough to remember it. So, you know, we were old for Saved by the Bell and watched it. We were young for Brady Bunch and watched it all through our lives.
Brady Bunch debuted in 1969. 1969 to 1974, which in my head was very surprising to me because I always knew, it was a, 60s, 70s show. But yet I wasn't born until 73. I wasn't watching it as a 1-year-old. And that was kind of amazing to me. The success of the show wasn't in its original run. It was well into syndication when it became the pop culture icon that it is.
5 years. It feels like that show was on for 12. It really, I mean, that's the impact I think that it had. I was born in 70, and to know that I've seen almost or probably every episode of the Brady Bunch, and it was over before I was even watching television. I was 4.
Right.
That speaks volumes. I did not even realize, wow, 5 years.
Because it didn't end though, Chris. We talked about spinoffs, right? We've talked about how Three's Company failed spinning off into Three's a Crowd. We talked about how Saved by the Bell became Saved by the Bell the college years, and then didn't succeed, but did with Saved by the Bell the new class. Brady Bunch did find a lot of success in later TV movies. A Very Brady Christmas, The Brady Brides. They had a short-lived variety show, The Brady Bunch Variety Show. They never went away. Some of them tried. You know, we got a new Jan for a while because she stepped out of the role and didn't want to do it. We had a different Cindy at one point. I mean, so they moved in and out saying, you know, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be typecast. But eventually they all embraced it and said, okay, this is going to be it. There is no not being typecast. This is bigger than me. I will always be Jan Brady. I will always be Greg Brady. They embraced it. Every single one of them. Eventually.
Yeah, I don't think that you could look at any single one of them in their old age and still not see. And I don't know who's still living and who's passed. I didn't get all
the
of
entire cast is still living. The kids.
The kids.
Lawrence Henderson passed away.
Yeah.
The dad passed away. Ann B. Davis passed away a couple years ago.
Yeah. And Ann B. Davis was 43 when she started the show.
So
amazing. We want to go back to that. Yeah.
She looked like 20.
20.
Alice?
Squared.
Alice.
It was Alice. Have you seen that they have a picture where they give her a modern hairstyle?
Yeah,
Alex was a whole ass snack. I mean, she was attractive. It was the curler set or whatever they called that. Yeah. The hair was the problem for a lot of them. Not Mr. Roper. He needed more help than a modern hairstyle would come across. But for Ann B. Davis, we got to give credit where credit's due. She was a handsome woman.
Yes. Handsome. That's what I would say. I would say handsome. Definitely say handsome. But it's another one of those iconic shows where you've probably seen, much like Saved by the Bell and Three's Company, literally every episode where you could probably just spout off like Friends was when we had the Friends discussion where you could just spout off and start quoting on Seinfeld, Friends. You could do that on the Brady Bunch, less the quotes than it was the scenes and the scenarios and things that had happened between them. And I'm trying to think of there was who was the football player from Pittsburgh?
Joe Namath.
Terry Bradshaw?
Oh, no. Joe Namath from the Jets was on the Brady Bunch.
Joe Namath. That's the one.
That wasn't Pittsburgh.
He was from Pittsburgh, wasn't he?
Oh, originally? I don't know where he was from.
He was the Jets.
Was Joe Namath from Pittsburgh? Yes. Yeah. See,
okay, I thought you meant from the Steelers. Okay, because he was from the Jets.
Beaver Falls, Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Again, connections, guest stars. The Brady of all the shows we mentioned, the Brady Bunch probably did it the best. You had Joe Namath. You had the Monkees. Davy Jones came and took Marcia to the prom. Just so many instances where really important people of the day would walk through that door.
Rita Wilson.
Really?
Yeah.
She won a Marcia. Did she compete against Marcia for student council president?
I don't
That was
really
an
remember.
episode.
Yeah.
And Greg was the judge or the beauty, whatever that was.
And here's another interesting fact about the Brady Bunch, though, too. Since it started in 1969, we knew that the two families had blended together, and we knew that Mike's wife had died. Carol was originally supposed to have had been a divorcee, but they decided, and I think maybe it was the 1969 subculture, she was not gonna be divorced on the show. They never really explicitly explained what happened to Carol's spouse.
So Aaron Spelling actually had an argument. This was another Aaron Spelling show. So I'm like, wait a minute, is this the connection? But I don't think he had anything to do with Three's Company. So I fall off there. He had the second two for sure. But if he did have something to do with it, I claim that connection as well now. Is that it? Did I win yet?
He's like,
but at any rate, he had an argument with the network. He wanted her to be divorced. And that's why it never said what her situation was, because the agreement they came up with was no, he would not be allowed to have her as a divorced woman, but they agreed that they would not then explain otherwise what happened to her ex-husband.
Yeah.
And when Chelle, when you're talking about the quotes, I mean, the one that my sister, my stepbrother, and I did at every single get-together dinner was pork chops and applesauce.
Oh, I was thinking Marsha.
Well, that too, but the pork chops and applesauce.
And I was thinking you were going to say, gee, Dad, I never thought about it like that, because that's the one of my brothers. And now to this day, my kids will do it. I'll spout off Mr. Brady to my kids about something, and my oldest will be like, gee, Dad, we never thought about it like that before.
Did your family, I don't know, John, how many siblings you have or anything, but, I think that the Brady Bunch kind of started that whole, let's take a picture of every kid from smallest to biggest going down the staircase. The Brady Bunch house reminds me of that, which, by the way, recently was re-renovated and sold. Yeah, HGTV did a very Brady renovation of the original house.
That's the inside never looked like the outside. So HGTV did an entire series on making it look like the original show, and did a great job with it. But I'm still in shock. The thing that I keep coming back to is the first thing you said. It aired for 4 years and wasn't successful. But think about the movie that the Brady Bunch movie brought it to that generation. So in the 90s, people were rediscovering it. HGTV just did that reno 3 or 4 years ago. So more people were able to find it then. It's going to be a sad day when they are gone. Like we mentioned how, some of them the older generation of them are gone. It's going to be really sad when the kids are gone, because then it's done. And I can't think of a show that it'll bother me that much, because I still think of them as the kids. And they're in their 60s, possibly even older now, maybe 70s.
I don't know how old all of them are, but you're right, because I grew up with them.
Yeah, if they live full lives, then it's going to be really sad, because we're all going to be in independent living by the time they die anyway. So it's maybe not Chelle, but John and I may be in independent living by then. I go back to too, and I correct me if I'm wrong here. I may be remembering this incorrectly, but there was a couple of 2-part episodes, and one of them was the Hawaii trip. It was either 2 parts or it was an extended one where it was an hour. 2 parts. And I remember that because that is probably my favorite episode, with the curse that with the spider on him while he's sleeping. I think, was it Peter that had the spider on him, or Greg?
Peter.
Peter had the spider on him, and the little, what it was, like a tiki
totem.
Tiki totem. Yes, thank you. But that was one of my favorite episodes, and I think part of it was because it was 2 parts, and we had to wait an entire week to get the next part. And as I think about that, maybe that's why I think that the Brady Bunch was on for 10 years, because now we're accustomed to watching shows, particularly streaming shows, that have 8 episodes in their season. Back then, 22, 24 episodes, 26 episodes sometimes in a season. So if you were around for 4.5 seasons, you got 110 episodes, compared to today where you'd have maybe 32.
The Brady Bunch ran for 5 seasons and 117 episodes. So you figure well over 20 episodes per season.
Yeah.
which would take it into like 8 years today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes.
And to your point, Chris, those were the episodes that I think I loved the best. They were the on-location episodes that took them into 2-episode story arcs. The Hawaii one was incredible, and you had help me, thriller narrator
Vincent Price.
Vincent Price show up and name the totem Oliver, and he was amazing in that. You had the Grand Canyon episode where they're all put in jail in the Old West. So there was that trip. There was the trip with Mr. Brady to the amusement park in Cedar Falls or wherever that was, and that was a 2-parter. It was cool seeing them go on trips and being places and doing things differently, and it was amazing watching them grow up on screen.
And even the iconic thing that the circle of squares, not circle of squares, the square of squares of each one of them at the beginning of the show was, going along with the song. People still use that, family photos still put that in each person in a square. I've done.
Calls.
What's that?
Zoom calls.
Zoom calls
often use the Brady Bunch format as a format you can choose.
Yeah. We're using the Brady Bunch format right now, only it's just us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did the Mr. Roper or Mr. Furley. We did the, Suzanne Summers arc. How did you guys feel about Oliver?
Which one was Oliver?
Oh,
the dog.
Oh, no, the dog, not the dog. No. I liked better than Oliver. Tiger was the dog.
Tiger was the dog. Yeah. Oliver was that wasn't the guy. That wasn't the meat guy, right?
It was the cousin Oliver that came in. I often talk about tropes of the 70s, and one is as the show's kids start to age out, they always introduce another young kid to try to bring back that dynamic, and it always is a harbinger of failure. It means that it's over, clear the set, you're all going home. And cousin Oliver was that for the Brady Bunch. Little blonde kid, straight hair. I mean, Chris had that haircut in one of his pictures.
The page boy haircut. I'm sure. Yeah. Now that you mention him, I remember him, but I didn't until you said Oliver, and I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I remember that. I don't remember how long he was on, but I do remember that character.
It was like a season or two. I think maybe just a season. His parents were off on a trip, and it was his Aunt Carol, so he came in. And again, it was just to bring some youth into it. And then because Cindy was no longer cute, Bobby was no longer cute, they needed that cuteness reinfused into the show, and it was a jump the shark moment. So a couple other trivia points about Brady Bunch that are often mentioned. One is in every shot of the Brady Bunch home, you'll never see a toilet. Like there's so many scenes of the girls and the boys getting ready in the bathroom. Specifically, the censors would not allow a toilet to be seen. That was a thing back then. The other thing was that in the entire house, there was only that one bathroom for everyone to share. There was never another scene of another bathroom. And even in Alice's room, when we're finally able to see the ensuite of Alice's room in the back, that's where the laundry was done. Because, of course, at one point it followed the trope of putting too much soap in the laundry and the soap going throughout the entire house. We saw that in so many shows growing up.
I always wanted to have an Alice. I used to think to myself, like, what did he do for a living? Like, this looks like a modest home. It's nothing special. And what did he do for a living that, allowed him to have an ensuite housekeeper? I wanted one of those.
Architects make bank.
Yeah.
As long as the kids don't lose his plans, he brought home some cash.
I do remember those episodes where they lost the plans. Now that I think about it,
that's another one where I could probably name every episode for you. It just stuck in my brain, and everything about it was the quintessential. After the Brady Bunch had changed, we were allowed. I think Rochelle, you brought up this that. Something pivoted in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, where we were able to see the flaws on television. They were no longer that perfect family. We got Roseanne in the 80s. We got to see the cracks. We got to see the issues. The Brady Bunch were perfect. Were as perfect as their AstroTurf lawn outside. I mean, they literally had potato sack races. They built card houses to settle family disputes.
Other than as a Brady, though, I can't think of anything that honestly can't think of anything anybody else has done that was beyond Brady.
They didn't need to. It kept coming back. There was even that 80s series where Jan and Marcia took the front, and there was the Brady Brides. They were being hired left and right to just be the Bradys. And like I said, they finally embraced it and were able to make a living off of it easily. They didn't need the 9 to 5 of being on another show to be successful.
John is just, with all of his knowledge about Saved by the Bell and the Brady Bunch, I'm convinced that he had a subscription to Tiger Beat back in the day. Probably had the Leif Garrett poster on the wall.
It's pop culture at its finest. I mean, both of those things, but especially Brady Bunch. There have been so many books written on it. I think I did have a Brady Bunch book of some kind sold at the Scholastic Book Fair. I think that, I picked up Dynamite magazine at the Scholastic Books Fair, and it had the Brady Bunch on the cover, probably. And this was 6 years after it went off the air.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, the fact that it went off the air and it became an icon of pop culture it's amazing to me.
Well, and it's not the only one. We've talked about Star Trek in episodes past. That went off the air. It wasn't on very long. I think it might have been 4 or 5 seasons. And yet it remade itself ad infinitum through the present day. Shows had staying power back then. They made enough of these episodes that they were able to enter into syndication, which was a huge cash cow for the networks because contracts weren't written to support those things at the time. So they were able to, the actors had done their job. The actors had gotten paid. Now it was a network making the money.
Yeah.
So, Rochelle, I do listen to things you say, and it sticks with me. And one thing you once said about another show was that you were able to watch these individually, that there was sometimes a short story arc, but for the most part, every single episode had a beginning, a middle, and a resolution at the end. And it made it easy. And Friends followed that, and Seinfeld followed that. And it's to your point, shows that you like. Big Bang Theory follows that. And yes, there's character development that goes through multiple episodes, but you can watch them out of order. You can watch one and not another and not miss a beat. And that's what made them perfect for syndication.
You know what? You're right, because now that I think about it, there's a lot of shows right now. If you walked in right in the middle of it, you have to go back to episode 1. There's no way you could walk in the middle of the show and understand what's going on. But they were their own little thing, because when I say I've seen every episode of Saved by the Bell or Three's Company or Brady Bunch, I really did, because if I watched it on syndication, if it was on at 4:00 in the afternoon, I didn't care what episode it was. I was watching it again.
Or 4:00 in the morning. I mean, I bartended my way through college. I drank a lot. Bars closed at 4 in the morning. I'd be home. I'd still be buzzed. I couldn't sleep. I'd be watching Nick at Night. I'd see the Brady Bunch on there. I'd see Three's Company somewhere. Maybe that's what made it stick into my head. I was at a very malleable state when I watched these.
You were also in a malleable state watching Saved by the Bell. Now, that's not the connection.
Yeah.
Okay, that is not the connection, but it makes a little bit of sense.
And speaking of Brady
you
Bunch,
were older, though.
With Brady Bunch?
Oh, not the Brady Bunch. Not the Brady Bunch, yeah.
So speaking of malleable, that's always a hard word for me to say, by the way. I think it was Chelle and I, our malleable moment was Beavis and Butthead, clearly, where yours was Saved by the Bell and the Brady Bunch.
It was anything that was on throughout the night. I've always been a night owl. I'm not a morning person. I don't know how I got through 20 years of banking. I can stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning, have no problem. I just can't get up at 4 or 5 in the morning. So whatever shows were on, especially in my 20s in the middle of the night, I watched those over and over again.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about all these things, all these 3 shows now, and I'm listening to you both, and I'm wondering if we could go and head into our final segment here of trying to guess the mystery connection or connections between these 3 shows. So we have Three's Company, Saved by the Bell, and the Brady Bunch. Any ideas?
They're all sitcoms.
You're not going to be. They're all ensembles.
True.
I mean, I thought Aaron Spelling. I honestly thought I was onto something. I don't think he was at all involved in Three's Company. They've all lived beyond their show. One connection that, if it's not the intended, that I think is huge, is these shows, as I've said multiple times this hour, were moments in time. They were successful in their moment, but they got more successful after the fact. Every one of these became bigger than themselves years after they went off the air.
And that is a beautiful connection. It's not the connection, but you know, it's you're not unwrong there. So
Unwrong.
unwrong. Yeah.
Unwrong. Yeah. You're not unwrong. Okay. So I'm going to.
Have you given us any clues?
I've given you a literal, a lot of clues.
Come on.
I gave you a lot of clues. Lots and lots and lots of them.
I mean, I'm trying to think of, is there an actor or an actress that's connected to all three? And I was thinking about like John Ritter. Did he appear on Saved by the Bell and Brady Bunch?
I didn't even give as many clues. I didn't give as many clues as John gave clues. John gave his own clues to the whole thing. All of it. You literally did my job for me here. And I really thought you had the entire thing the whole way along.
So was it the character replacements?
No, because that's a little hidden connection. That's definitely a hidden connection. The character replacements would be something that the Ropers and Mr. Furley, yeah, of course.
And then they had the replacements in the Brady Bunch, and they had the character changes, and so that's not it.
No, because
guest stars?
No, that would have been. I was a little red herring I threw in there too about between
sure you did.
The Saved by the Bell and the Brady Bunch, but I can't recall as many guest stars on Three's Company.
The only other thing I can think of, well, it goes back to my first thing. These became big in syndication, but you already told me no.
Yeah.
I wonder if I was starting to think too, and this may be way beyond what you're thinking about, but that each one of those shows had a quote unquote central character that wasn't really designed to be part of the show overall. Three's Company focused on the three, but Mr. Roper or Mr. Furley were really like integral characters. Then Saved by the Bell, you had Mr. Belding, and then you had Alice and the Brady Bunch. But none of those shows are really designed for those three characters, although they each had huge impacts on the show.
And I think that's an excellent point. And had that been my connection, I might have guided you right along in that direction. But John himself, if you'd like me to do the grand reveal drum roll. Ready? John, you know what? You want to give it one more round?
I know this. I know everything about all three of these shows. This hurts me.
Yes, this one's gonna hurt you because this was.
I'm distracted by the bet.
I'll buy you a bourbon anyway when we get together. So,
each one of these shows completely iconic in and of itself. If you think about the people that were producing these shows at the time, each one of them wanted to cash in on the amazing way that these shows were cash cows for whatever network they happen to be on or in syndication.
I owned spinoff earlier. I said that. I go, if the connection that ends up being a spinoffs, I said it.
But slightly more specifically, what about these spinoffs?
None of them worked. I mean, they were not a single one of them was as successful as the original.
And there is each one of these has produced a one-hit wonder spinoff that was never successful or even never made it off of the ground. And in fact, multiple spinoffs that never even came into fruition that were based on the original show. And John, early on, you mentioned it. You said spinoffs, okay? But it was the bad spinoffs. It wasn't necessarily the good spinoffs because the very Brady Christmas maybe, but the Brady Brides, the Brady Show, the Brady Hour, the Three's a Crowd. There was a spinoff of the Brady Bunch where I think it was Greg was supposed to have adopted 3 multiracial orphans. It was the ending of the final episode. A lot of shows just never even made it off of the ground. So as iconic as they were, barely any of them could make it out. So it was kind of like typecasting. I thought I was going to give you that red herring of the typecasting there, because each one of the people in these shows, although some made it out later, they never quite hit the same stride that they did in the original runs of their shows. So there's another little red herring there, but it is, in truth, it's that really bad. There was the Saved by the Bell, the college years. There was, a lot, they just didn't last and didn't make it.
I'm taking a half a point.
And $5.
and one of my $2. Without a doubt, the expression that comes to my mind is lightning never strikes twice, at least in the same spot. And for these shows, it's a contradiction, because usually when a show can't get a sitcom, get a spin-off to work, then it's deemed a failure. But the original never went away, and it's just a weird contradiction. Because most shows that can't force themselves to live beyond themselves fade into obscurity. These had failed spin-off after failed spin-off, and yet there was always somebody willing to say, well, let's try a movie this time. Let's try this time. And that's different. Three's Company, maybe a little less so than the other two. They gave Three's a Crowd a shot, and then they just let it be, more or less, unless I'm forgetting something.
The Ropers. The Ropers had their own.
Yeah.
And the Ropers actually went on for 2 seasons. And when they had decided that they were going to cut the Ropers, Norman Fell said, I want to come back to Three's Company. And of course, they were like, no, Don Knotts is working here. We're good. And so then there was a proposed show called The Three Apartments or something like that, where they actually wanted to come back in and make it something new. Everybody was trying to get on that cash cow, but none of them actually worked very well at all. The Brady Bunch Hour lasted 2 years. The Brady Bunch Girls Get Married, 1981. The Brady Brides was also 1981. A Very Brady Christmas, 1988. And The Bradys in 1990. So, I mean, they were going from 1969 to 1990, and they never, and they're still keeping going.
It's it's a testament to how difficult it is to catch that magic in a bottle with these ensemble casts. And then when they try to do it without all the characters, well, it was the chemistry of the actors and actresses and all of those characters. Really, if you look at even some of the, look at Seinfeld, they never really did a spinoff. Friends tried with Joey, it didn't work. Who knows if the Big Bang Theory will do something down the road. I mean, they have Young Sheldon, but it's kind of a prequel, I think it says something about, we would look at that and say, well, that's kind of a failure. Like, that's all they had. But it's also a success because it tells you how important the show was. And it was so important, so iconic, and so much, it was so ingrained in our lives that we couldn't even see a show with one of those characters or two of those characters without everybody else. And the only one, I mean, again, it would be great for people in the comments to put like shows that you remember that had successful spinoffs. I think All in the Family, The Jeffersons, right? That was obviously a big success. You could argue almost bigger than All in the Family. I mean, we could have that conversation too. You had Cheers with Frasier, but it's just really difficult to do. And it says something about the moment that they had.
Final words from the two of you about this episode.
I really enjoyed it. I would not, shocking to everybody, would not have gotten that connection. I mean, when I think about it now, of course, but there were other pieces that I was trying to put together. You'd mentioned Three's Company that was a spinoff of a British show. And I know that we've had a lot of successful shows in the US that are spinoffs of British shows. Most recently, The Office is one. So I think it was awesome. And I want to watch all the shows again now. Because it did, minus Saved by the Bell, the Brady Bunch, and Three's Company. I'm back in my family room, my living room when I was a kid with our TV with 3 stations. And I'm feeling really good about that. So thank you for this one, because this really took me back.
Well, thank you, Chris. I agree with you. Crisscross applesauce on your floor model pine encased TV.
Yes.
And for the audience watching, listening, I will tell you that this is one of the episodes. Probably this episode gets the record for being the most over. I'm going to have to edit out 50 minutes, almost an hour of this to make it work. Maybe like the Brady Bunch.
It wasn't me.
No, it's always me. It's always me. But the evidence of it being me always ends up on the cutting room floor. And that's because how iconic, again, 2 out of 3 of these were. But, we say that and we downplayed Saved by the Bell. But if we were 30 and 33, or maybe even 40 and 43 instead of 50 and 53, I think Saved by the Bell would be more important and enter in the conversation very much the same way as the other 2 were for us. So I could talk about these topics forever, obviously. And I'm just glad I was somewhere in the universe of your topics, hidden meaning.
You were the universe. You knew all about these. And speaking of it going long, we talked about how episodes had a very special episode that continued next week. You could just take this and split it into 2, and we could be a very special 3 View Mirror podcast. Stay tuned with a conclusion, bum, 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 next week. It was a pleasure. John, I loved your trivia. Chris, I loved every contribution. I think it was a fantastic episode.
Well, guys, for me, this is John Catriti signing off, saying please remember to subscribe, share the show if you enjoy it, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye. Stay rad, everybody.